This podcast looks at a very, very common essay question. It's about the rise to power of the Nazis following the Wall Street crash of 1929. And the question is, the Wall Street crash was the most important reason for the increase in support for the Nazis in the years 1928 to 32. Do you agree? Explain your answer. It will be a 16-minute, 16-mark question, which would be equivalent to 25 minutes. So a substantial proportion of the whole paper, a third of the marks on the paper, remember, with the big essay question at the end. So therefore needs to be planned and it needs to be paragraphed. So what I've written for you here is a model plan, which you need to learn by heart. And this question can appear in a range of different forms in the exam, but basically it is always the same type of question. Okay, so let's have a look at the question and try to get beneath what it is asking of you. It's focusing in what were the reasons for why the Nazis' support increased so much between 1928 to 1932. So it's not specifically about how Hitler became Chancellor, it's about the increase in popularity of the Nazis. And what it does is it gives you one of the reasons, the Wall Street crash. Now again, the type of mistake that many candidates make is they see the word Wall Street crash and that's all they talk about. They simply say that was the reason the Nazis increased support. Clearly what the examiners want you to do is to get beneath the question and to identify other reasons as well. It isn't to say you shouldn't talk about the Wall Street crash, but you must talk about the other reasons as well. And then conclude by weighing up the different reasons. So in the final analysis, the examiners want you to say there were several reasons for why Nazi support increased. Okay, so how would you approach it? As always, in your introduction, show understanding of what the question is about. Put the question into context. So clearly, if the question is about the increase in support for the Nazis between 1928 and 1932, then you need to show knowledge of that increase in the introduction. So you should clearly see in the introduction, it mentions that in May 1928 the Nazis only had 2.6% of the vote. By July 1932 they had 37% of the vote. The introduction also shows knowledge about what the Wall Street crash was, when it happened, the fact that it happened at the end of the golden era 1924-28, and the fact that as a result of the Wall Street crash it triggered the Great Depression, and the Great Depression was a period of massive unemployment that reached its peak in 1933, and it started in 1929, reaching 6 million. Now, if you look at that introduction, there are literally only 3 sentences. That introduction will probably just take you a couple of minutes to write, but it is very, very important because it sets your answer up. So 2 to 3 minutes on the introduction, just showing basic knowledge, putting the question into context. You then move into answering that question. So let's have a look at the answer. As you can see, the main body of the answer, paragraphs 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, so there are basically 5 paragraphs on that. So you probably want to spend 3 to 4 minutes on each of these paragraphs. Okay. Now the most important thing, let's just say for example you've got 3 to 4 minutes to spend on paragraph 2. The most important thing, as always, is that topic sentence. As long as you make that topic sentence, then you are going to score highly. You don't need 3 or 4 minutes though to write that topic sentence down. You will have time in that 3 or 4 minutes to develop that topic sentence as you do here, using precise knowledge. So let's look at that topic sentence. Okay, so what you're saying here is the Wall Street crash was an important reason. You're agreeing with the point that's made in the question. You're saying, yes, the Wall Street crash was an important reason. Why? Because it caused massive unemployment and because the Nazis in their election campaigns promised to create jobs. That, therefore, made them popular with the German voters. You can develop that with a range of information. If you look to the right, so you can mention 6 million unemployed, and in particular it was the lower middle classes who were most badly hit by the Great Depression: small shopkeepers, tradesmen, crafts workers. Joseph Goebbels was the propaganda chief in the Nazi Party, so Hitler in his speeches was constantly targeting his message at the lower middle classes. On the whole, remember, the working classes, they lost their jobs, but they were on the whole attracted more to the communists. More on that in paragraph 6 below. You then move into paragraph 3. Again, 3 to 4 minutes. Most important thing is making that point in the topic sentence. And what you're doing here is you're turning it around. You're saying, on the other hand, whenever you use that phrase at the beginning of a paragraph, a very useful phrase is you're saying, I'm now moving to the counter argument. I'm moving to the opposite point of view. I'm actually challenging the point that's put in the question. So the point put in the question was that the Wall Street crash was the most important reason for the increase in popular support. You're now going to say, actually, it can't have been the only reason. Okay, and the point you're making here is a very, very powerful one. All the opposition parties, there were other parties that were campaigning for power in the elections. They all made the same promise. They all promised to create jobs. A bit like we have an election at the moment. All the parties are giving the same messages to get votes. There are differences, subtle differences, but if there's massive unemployment, it goes to say all parties are going to say we're going to create jobs. So give an example of that. Now the best example is Alfred Hugenberg. He was the leader of the German Nationalist Party, and that his party made very, very similar promises to Hitler, but the Nationalist Party didn't win the votes. So clearly, therefore, there must be another reason why the Nazis captured the vote rather than the other parties. And what you're doing in the next 3 paragraphs, what pulls them together, is you're focusing in on what was distinctive about the Nazi Party. Okay, so and you're basically going to make 3 points. Paragraph 4, the first distinctive feature is they had a strong, charismatic leader. They were the only political party out there who had actually a strong personality leading their party. And that's to talk about Hitler, talk about his personality, the way in which he was superb at public speaking, the way in which he campaigned, his electioneering style, the way in which he used aeroplanes to go to mass rallies, ever so exciting for people at that time, the way in which he campaigned. Goebbels' propaganda focused completely on Hitler, on the leader of the party, whereas the other political parties tended to focus their propaganda more on their message, and that didn't work as well. Paragraph 5, the next point you want to make, sticking onto the same theme, what was distinctive about the Nazis compared to other parties? The Nazis were the only other party that had a real sense of energy and action. They were not all talk, they were a party that did things. And people voted for the Nazis because they actually thought they would do things. Okay, so emphasise that. They were also a party that appealed to all social classes right across the spectrum. So they did capture, although they mainly got the lower middle class, they did capture some of the working class vote as well, and the upper class. And why? Because they promised, they focused on national unity. The other parties tended to focus their message on promises that would appeal just to that one section of the population where they got most of their votes, where the Nazis tried to appeal to all Germans by emphasising national unity. Okay, so there's your main point. You probably want to spend longer on that paragraph because there's quite a lot to say. Lots you can bring in to back it up. The stormtroopers gave an image of strength and action. The way in which the party was organised into gaus meant the Nazi message got to every corner of Germany, and it could be tailored to the type of people living in that area of Germany. The campaigning style, the rallies, the music, the images, the salutes, all of those factors you can develop. And then the final paragraph, paragraph 6, or the final main paragraph, paragraph 6, the most important reason for increased Nazi support was they tapped in to the middle class fear that there was going to be a communist revolution, and the Nazis seemed to be the only party capable of crushing communism. So really, really hammer that point home. Many of the people who lost jobs as a result of the Great Depression turned to the Communist Party for support. The Communist Party were on the rise as well. If they took power, they would basically have taken the wealth of the middle class and spread it equally amongst the people. And the middle classes were desperately afraid of that happening, which is why the Nazis got their support mainly from the middle classes. So you really want to emphasise that fact. And the Nazis seemed to be capable of breaking the communists because they were a party of action. Why? Because they had their stormtroopers, the SA, who during the elections were breaking up communist meetings, and the middle classes were seriously impressed. So the main body of the essay, you're probably going to spend the best part of 19-20 minutes developing those 5 key paragraphs. You then move into the conclusion, allow yourself again 2 to 3 minutes just to pull it together, and you can see the key points in the conclusion. Go back to the Wall Street crash, say, yeah, it was important, and a couple of nice words here, a trigger or a catalyst, that it triggered a change that until 1928-29 the Nazis had been experiencing lean years, and it provided an opportunity for them to campaign for support and to increase their support. But emphasise again that it wasn't the only factor. If it was the only factor, other parties would have achieved votes as well. The Nazis in particular had distinctive features: their charismatic leader, a party of energy and action, and they were capable of destroying the communist threat because they promised to create national unity. The other political parties couldn't deliver on that. That's the end of this podcast. I hope that was helpful to you.